Okay, welcome everybody to this um, edition of the Genocide Memorial Day, organized by the Decolonial International Network and the International Institute for Scientific Research. My name is Sandro Gira. I'm the Secretary of the Decolonial International Network Foundation and the Director of the International Institute for Scientific Research. The Genocide Memorial Day is a day to remember men's inhumanity to men. GMD, Genocide Memorial Day, was started in 2010 by a founding member of the Decolonial International Network, the Islamic Human Rights Commission in London, as an annual tradition to commemorate the Zionist attack on Gaza in 2009, where 1,400 Palestinian, mainly citizens, were killed without any intervention by governments. And the GMD aims to create awareness about the factors leading up to genocide and what we can do to prevent them. So today, the theme of our GMD is famine as an instrument of genocide. And I'm very happy to introduce a good friend, Dr. Jaya Mehta, a senior economist who has been working since 2009 at the Joshi Adhikari Institute of Social Studies based in Delhi. I had the pleasure of inviting her to a Decolonizing the Mind Summer School in Amsterdam we organized in 2015, and where she enlightened us about her insights in the history of India. She has been a senior fellow at the Institute of Human Development in New Delhi, the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Simla. Before she worked as a reader at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune, she was a founding member of Alternative Economic Survey Group and has been contributing regularly to its annual numbers. She has been engaged in studying the agrarian crisis in the Indian economy, poverty measurements, women's issue, theory and praxis of socialist systems. In 2009, she coordinated a primary survey on marginal farmers across 8 states of India, delineating their production and marketing pattern. 8 volumes were prepared presenting the agrarian scene in the country. After that, she has conducted a study on collective farming by women in the state of Kerala. Her book related to the studies is with the publisher. She also made a study on working class movements in pre- and post-independent India. Recently, she edited a book, The Russian Revolution and Indian Freedom Struggle, to commemorate 100 years of Russian Revolution. She also wrote a booklet on revolutionary potential of women workers in agriculture in 2019 on the occasion of the 100 years of the death anniversary of Rosa Luxemburg, who's, by the way, one of my favorite Marxists. She has directed plays and made a few documentaries on various topics related to working class and oppressed groups. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jaya and give her the floor to start her lecture on the famine in India. Thank you, Jaya, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you very much for giving me this chance to speak. It's indeed a great honor for me to be able to speak on this day, Genocide Memorial Day, and talk about man's inhumanity to man. Famine in India during colonialism is the topic of my speech today. And I will begin with sovereign rights that East India Company acquired in India in 1764. Actually, East India Company arrived in India in the year 1600, and then it was just a trading partner. But after the Battle of Plassey in 1754, it captured Bengal in a big way. And then there was another battle in 1764. That is, 1754 was Battle of Plassey, and 1764 was the Battle of Buxar, after which East India Company had negotiations with the weak Mughal Empire and got for itself the right to tax people in Bengal. So that is the sovereign right that East India Company acquired in 1764. And after that, after East India Company acquired the sovereign rights, India has witnessed series of famines. Immediately after that, in 1770, there was a very big, huge destruction in Bengal itself in the name of famine. 1770 famine in Bengal killed 10 million people. That time the population of Bengal was only 30 million. So 1/3 of the population got disseminated in that famine, and it was not, you know, the natural causes. It was the East India Company's acquisition of sovereign rights over Bengal which created this famine. Because what the company did was that before the company had acquired rights, there used to be divans from the local Indians who were aligned with the Mughal Empire in Delhi. But they were considerate towards people, and they used to tax, like, say 10% or 15% of the produce was being taxed by the divans. And when there was drought or any natural calamity, they would give concession, and they would see to it that, you know, people. And Bengal, in fact, in 1600 was a very rich province. It was an extremely rich province because it had water from many rivers, and it was, tropical countries are anyway very rich because they have this biodiversity advantage, and it was growing all that it needed, and it had very skilled artisans. It was producing all that it was needed, and everything was being exported from Bengal. In return, Bengal would get gold and silver because there was nothing that Bengal wanted from outside. It was quite self-sufficient and a rich region. But after the Battle of Plassey, when East India Company entered, they started looting the region very ferociously. And when they acquired the rights to tax Bengal, the taxes went up from 10% to 50%. And the people did not know what was happening. And if the East India Company was very clear that whatever happens, the tax revenue should not reduce. And they used all kinds of inhuman means for keeping their tax revenue up. So in 1769, when the crops failed for the first time and people could not produce as much, as it is, the tax rates were very high. Then lots of people left, they were displaced, they left their houses or they got killed. So the company, to maintain the revenue, would tax the farmer for the neighbor's land also. You know, and if non-payment of tax was there, they were really cruel to the extent of making women naked, hurting their breasts. And, you know, under any circumstances, the revenue for East India Company did not go down, and people were disseminated in Bengal. That was the beginning of sovereign right of East India Company. After that, I'll just give you a list of famines that occurred in India, because this sovereign right then extended from Bengal to other regions also. So 1770 was the first famine in Bengal, where 10 million people, 1/3 of the population, got disseminated. 1783-84, famine was there in North India, in the Delhi region and Eastern Punjab and Kashmir, in which 15 million people died. And large section of areas became depopulated. You know, forests started growing over there. Then in 1791-92, Maratha region and southern India was afflicted by famine. 11 million people died. 1837 to 38, Agra and Delhi region had famine. 0.8 million people died. Then 1860 to 61, Agra, Delhi, and Hisar had famine. 2 million people died. 1865 to 1867, Madras and Orissa, that is southern India, 1 million in Madras and 4 to 5 million in Orissa. People died. 1868 to 70, Rajasthan, Punjab, that is Western India, Northern India, Bombay and Madras, 1.5 million died. After that, 1876 to 78 and 1896-97 to 1902, there was this India famine about which Mike Davis has written the book about late Victorian Holocaust, which Sandy came across and invited me to talk about the famines. So this India famine, again, 5.5 million, 5 million, 3 to 10 million, millions of people died. And then the last was when the Britishers gave up transferred their sovereign right in 1947. Just before that, in 1943, we had the Great Bengal Famine. And I requested that I'd like to talk about Bengal Famine because it is more recent, more information is available about it. And I could also share some reactions to this famine, because otherwise I'm just giving numbers and not talking from the point of view of people as to how they reacted. So therefore, I would now like to talk about Bengal famine, which took place in the midst of Second World War. And Second World War started in 1939. I also want to read out a quote by Churchill. Churchill said, "No great portion of world population was so effectively protected from the horrors and perils of World War as were the people of Hindustan." That is what Churchill wrote in his 1950 history of 20th century's most lethal conflict. They were carried through the struggle on the shoulders of our small island. So, Churchill is writing that Indian population was completely protected by the horrors of Second World War, and we sailed through it without any much cost to pay on the narrow shoulders of Britain. But let me tell you that actually in Britain, the civilians and soldiers together, the loss of life was only 0.5 million. Whereas in Bengal famine, which was caused by the British policy during the Second World War, 3 million people died, civilians. And I will now elaborate as to what the policy was. Actually, when the war started, apart from recruiting Indians as soldiers in the war, the Britain threw all the cost of war, especially in this region towards the east, on the shoulders of Indian budget. So when Pearl Harbor was attacked, America joined the war, and then Japan started campaigning for Rangoon, Burma. And when Japan started campaigning for Burma, Burma is very close to Bengal. It's on the border, I mean, the sea in between. So then it was necessary that war efforts were concentrated in Bengal. And concentrating war effort meant making bridges, making highways, making airstrips, and producing lots of material, ammunitions and clothes and requirements for those requirements of the war efforts. And all this was produced by India through Indian budget. In return, What Britain did was they put some sterlings in a Reserve Bank of India account in England, but India was not allowed to withdraw any money from that. But on the basis of the sterlings which were put in Reserve Bank of India account, Indian government or British government in India was given the freedom to print notes 2.5 times the sterling balances in Reserve Bank of India. So, you know, the notes were printed and inflation was created. Notes were printed to finance the war efforts of Britain, but it created terrific inflation in the region and in the entire country and in Bengal region in particular. And the you know the expense, like half of GDP became the budget for the war efforts, and this money which was spent was used only for this for the purpose of war, for building airstrips, for building bridges, or building producing ammunition, giving employment to people in the factories which were producing for war. None of this expenditure which was made in India budget was for the Indian civilians or the population in India, which was unrelated to war efforts. And in Bengal, the majority of the population was rural population in agriculture, in fishing, in wage work, artisan work, etc., etc. So I already talked about 1770 famine, and I talked about how British East India Company onwards, Bengal was looted over the years, and in Bengal, which was a very rich province in 1600, was actually a poor region in 1943. Per capita food grain availability was as low as 137 kilograms per year. So there wasn't much food, there wasn't much surplus with the people of India, with the people of Bengal, and the inflation which was created by the expenditure, war expenditure, was something with which the unorganized rural agrarian sector of India just could not cope with. The paddy, which was the main crop produced, subsistence crop produced, was there was already a bit of diversion from paddy to jute and other export crops required for the Britain industrialization, and paddy was produced in large quantities. But when the inflation took place and the entire balance got upset, there wasn't enough rice. And then Rangoon, when Rangoon was bombed, there used to be some import of paddy from Rangoon, which was stopped. When Rangoon was bombed, or before Rangoon was bombed, when there was a campaign by Japan to capture Burma, lots of Bengalis, Indians who had gone to Burma for the sake of employment started returning back. So 1 million refugees came back from Burma to India on Bengal border, and nothing was available to give them. They were sick, they were hungry, they had no employment, no work, and no arrangement was made to look after them. But after Japan's control over Burma became strong, the military also returned to Bengal from Rangoon, and all the provision which was made, transport, clothes, food, etc., was made for these military guys who returned. The Britishers, the Americans, the Australians who returned from Rangoon to Bengal, and the Indian refugees were sick. They spread epidemics, and they had no food. So the demand for food increased, and the supply for food decreased because of loss of import from Rangoon and from other regions of India also. There was not enough food grain being transferred to Bengal. Then another thing that British government did, was that when they feared that Japanese army will come from Burma to Bengal, then they wanted to they had this strategy that Japanese army should be deprived of all kinds of transport, and it should be deprived of all food grain available. So in the neighboring districts of port, the British order was that whatever surplus food grain is there should be taken away by the government, destroyed or transferred away, but no food grain should be available in 2, 3, 4 districts where they feared Japanese army will arrive. And the transport in Bengal used to be through boats, because there were lots of rivers and canals and people used to go by boats. The railways were there, but railways were mainly for military purposes and for Britishers. So this local transport through boats was, the government captured 45,000 boats, stopped people from this transport. So all these boatmen became without livelihood facilities. The fishermen suffered because of this. And of course, there was no food. So this was, it was not, the crop failed. There was a cyclone, there was a crop disease also, but crop failed in, I think, November 1942. From where you have the 43 famine. But the price of paddy increased 6 times in just before the crops failed, because of the British policy. As Amartya Sen has rightly written, it is not shortage of food or natural causes which leads to famine, and especially in the context of Bengal famine, it is lack of purchasing power. So when the price of paddy goes up by 6 times, and the rural poor have no way of buying paddy so expensive, and then whatever paddy is there, it is taken away by the government for the people who are employed in war efforts and the army men who are coming back. And also, there was a rationing in Calcutta and urban areas, so that the privileged population for the war was not handicapped, it was not starved. So when you take care of the privileged population and you leave the rest of the civilians alone, then you can understand what kind of calamity it leads to. And the kind of first people started consuming less, they took loan, they then left their jobs, tried to find employment outside. The men left. After some time, women left, children also left in huge numbers. They came from villages to urban areas thinking that they would get some relief over there, some food over there, some employment over there. And the population which died of starvation, I said 3 million people died. A lot of them were children. At that time, Bengal had, according to the census, 37% of the population below the age of 14. And if you say that, children, the mothers first fed their children, and then, so the proportion of children dying is not as much as 37%. Even if you make it 30%, then 1 million children below the age of 14 died. Those who used to go to school 1 year before, who were playing in the fields, who were playing on the streets, in 18 months' time, all of them perished. And, then there were, of course, community kitchens, and people tried to help. There were self-help groups who provided relief. But I also want to read out one particular instance which brings out the kind of starvation which was there among the people, if you will allow me. Ashok Mitra was a scholar. And before that, he was in civil service at the time of Bengal famine, and he was in the civil service and in charge of a place called Munshiganj in eastern Bengal. And he wanted to, when people were coming in great numbers, starved people, then he wanted to arrange some community kitchen for them. So he tried various things, and subsequently he was able to obtain rice through a military officer. When it arrived from Calcutta, it was half rotted and gritty with gravel, with food, but food nonetheless. And by 20th October, he had opened 100 gruel kitchens all over Munshiganj. At first, the kitchens provided just soft boiled rice, but later they began to offer nourishing mixture of rice, lentils, and bit of potatoes or squash flavored with salt, turmeric, bay leaf, and a little oil. The starving would fall upon the khichdi, that is the mixture that they made, khichdi, eat their fill, and swell up like balloons, their arms and legs as translucent as white of an uncooked egg. Their bodies having partially consumed their cell walls, the fluids they ingested had flowed into the spaces between the cells. If you saw the thrill in their eyes, you couldn't scold them for eating too much, Mitra said. The mixture would hasten their death, but he felt death was inevitable for them as such at such a late stage of starvation. That they got some tiny food before they died was some comfort to me. So, there are stories about, I will show you some pictures also in the end as to what kind of a ghastly scene the entire Bengal had become. And after creating so much of pathos in a region, Churchill had the guts to say that India paid no cost for the World War II. This kind of tragedy in Bengal was it created reactions, and first of all, the artists and it led to a radical art form in India related to reality. I'll come to that when I show some photos. And before that, I want to say that the Bengal famine also created a different consciousness amongst the peasants, those who were left. As I said, 3 million died, and people say that that time the population of Bengal in 1943 was about 60 million. So 3 million died, and about 20 million were affected badly by the famine and the tragedy. And after the war got over, and there was some kind of a semblance of equilibrium back in Bengal, the peasants who went back to their villages, the peasants who had lost their land during famine because they didn't have any money and they had to eat, so they gave up their land, they went back to their villages, and they started working there as sharecroppers. Even otherwise, Bengal had small farms, about 75%, there were about 75 lakh holdings, and 75% of those holdings, 57 lakh holdings, were less than 2 hectares in size. Less than 2 hectares holding means that you are not able to survive or have a dignified livelihood with that much area. Of course, Bengal is a little different because it has a lot of water, but there were lots of small holdings. When famine came, when crops failed and cyclone came and crop disease came and the British war efforts came, then people sold off there. The sale of land in Bengal during famine years went up by 300%, 500%, 600% in the villages. So when these people returned back, they had no land, and they joined agriculture as sharecroppers. And sharecroppers were a big number. Most of the people who were in agriculture were working in Bengal villages as sharecropper. As sharecroppers, they were still, being looted by the jamindars and jotdars, by which I mean the landlords. when the famine came, they sold their land to the landlords, and when they came back, the land was with the landlord. They took that land on lease and worked on it. The landlord would take away all the harvested paddy to his house or his area, and then ask the sharecropper to come and take half the share from that. And while giving half the share, he would charge various taxes on various things, and ultimately the person would get very little. And if the person has taken some loan or something, then he would pay interest on that loan. And during harvest time, the price of paddy being low, for one bag of paddy, the return would be 6 bags of paddy. This kind of loan return was there just at the time of harvest. So this was a very unethical system and exploitative system for the poor farmers. And in 45, 46, there was another thing that I want to tell you, that when during famine, the left leadership in Bengal came to the help of the deprived rural people in a big way. They started lots of community kitchens. They went to rural areas. They tried to help them. So they had got very deeply ingrained. The Communist Party of India had got deeply ingrained in rural agricultural land. And in 45, 46, again, when there was a slight hint that the crops may fail, the peasants acted in a very different way. They collected together, they took flags in their hand, they took lathis in their hand, and they went to all these landlords' granary and forced the landlords to sell the grain at a given reasonable price. So they did not allow holders and landlords to, allow the price of paddy to go up like it went up during famine time. After that, this movement acquired a big volume. There were about, I think, 60 million people who got, not 60 million, sorry, 60 lakhs people who got involved, and 19 districts were involved in this movement, which is called the Great Tebhaga Movement. Tebhaga struggle just before independence, and in independent India, Telangana struggle and Tebhaga struggle are considered as big peasant revolt for having a just agrarian scene. So Tebhaga is 1/3. So these sharecroppers had 3 demands. One demand was that the grain that they produce will not go to the landlord's granary. It will be kept collectively or individually with the farmer, the person who has tilled the land and has grown the grain. Second demand was that the landlord would get not half of the produce, but only 1/3 of the produce. 2 parts of the produce will be given, 2/3 of the produce will belong to the peasant who has grown the thing. And third demand was that if somebody has taken loan in terms of paddy from rentier or somebody, there will be no interest charged on that loan. So with these 3 demands, poor peasants collected, and collectively they forged a very, militant and forceful struggle. And 3 things about these struggle is, one is that they were poor peasants, and they did not have the kind of resource base that is required for a militant struggle. Second is that at that time in 45, 46, when Bengal was having Hindu-Muslim riots, communal riots between the Muslims and the Hindu, in rural areas, the Muslim peasants and Hindu peasants got together to assert their livelihood rights. So it led to a communal unity at a time when there was rift in the rest of the Bengal. And third very important part of this Debaga movement was that women played a very important role. They came in the forefront. They would protect their grain. They would fight with the police. They would fight with the landlord goons. They sacrificed their lives, but they did not give up. Ultimately, the British government was ruthless enough to conduct firing in lots of districts, and the Tebhaga struggle died down. But after the partition, after independence, both in East Bengal as well as in West Bengal, this demand that sharecroppers should have security over the land that they lease and they should get 2/3 of the produce was accepted by both the independent governments, both in India and in East Bengal also. So the Tebhaga struggle had a long-term effect, and the fact that women participated and the fact that Hindu Muslims together waged the struggle, and the fact that people did not give up. It was spontaneous. It is true that it was led by the Communist Party of India. The direction was given by them, but it was also, there was a spontaneity. People did not want to give up. It makes the Bhaga struggle a very important struggle of India's agrarian scene. Having said this, now I'd like to show you, I also said that Bengal famine led to radicalization of cultural field and art field in India. And I'd like to share some photographs and some things which were made on Bengal famine at that time. You know, this photograph, when Bengal famine took place, and I told you what Churchill wrote, the world and even the rest of India did not know what was happening to Bengal. And there was some effort, I will come to that later, who made sketches and who tried to tell what was happening to Bengal, but those copies were confiscated by Bengal police and were not allowed to go. Then Statesman was a newspaper, and Statesman kept on writing. The editor was Ian Stephen. He was supposed to be a conservative kind of a person, but he just could not tolerate what he saw. He wrote number of editorials to which people did not react. And then this is the photo which came on 22nd August 1943 in the Statesman newspaper, which took the news of Bengal famine to New Delhi and to New York together. So this is a photo, important photo in that. Then, as I told you, that Communist Party of India took a very active role in not just giving relief to people, but also trying to tell the world as to what is happening at that time. So there was a young photographer called Sunil Jana. Maybe you've heard of him. Sunil Jana was an excellent photographer, and he took some photos. There was CPI magazine, People's War. He took photos for that CPI magazine of Bengal famine. I show you those photos. I told you that lots of children died. The unfortunate part of Bengal famine was that, you know, children under the age of 14 died. This is the photo taken by Sunil Jana. This is the kind of starvation that one can see, how the skin is touching the bones. Another child. And this is the photograph of women queuing for food in the relief community kitchens. So these were photos. Then later on, they were published in Life magazine, and they became very popular. They were circulated all over the world. First, they were in People's War, and Sunil Jana was an excellent radical photographer who used his skill to be able to tell people what is happening to the marginalized section of the population, and to be able to express what economic genocide the colonial government carried on during the Second World War. Then there was an artist, Chitta Prasad. Chitta Prasad was born in 1915, so in 1943 he was in his 20s. He made sketches. I told you that, you know, there was an effort to make sketches of Hungry Bengal. The compilation of those sketches was Hungry Bengal, and 5,000 copies were made of that, which the police destroyed. These were the sketches that Chitta Prasad has made. Last of Hitra Mohan. He was, you know, there were so many deaths that they did not get a proper ending. Also, they were left for the vultures and dogs. Then another one is by Zainul Abidin. He was from East Bengal. He was also contemporary of Chitta Prasad, who made sketches of Bengal famine. People fighting with crows to get food. Apart from photos and sketches, the art world, big artists, people like Ravi Shankar and people like Uday Shankar and big artists joined together to tell the world as to what is happening in Bengal. There were plays, there were songs, and they went, the Indian People's Theatre Association was formed in 1943, which is People's Theatre, and people are the stars in that theatre. And they went all over, they made plays, and Shambhu Mitra was there, Balraj Sahni was there, and they depicted what was happening in Bengal. And Indian People's Theatre Association made a film in 1946. That film was called Dharti Ke Lal, that is Children of this Earth. And I'll show you a few clips from that film to be able to give you the impression as to what kind of tragedy it was. That it shows relatively, in a very dramatic way, the pathos of Bengal. These are people going from villages to urban centers in search of food. Another scene where I am giving you the scene of community kitchens where people were asking for food. This is saying that today no fuel is available. Khichdi band. And this is a song which was in that film, which was a very representative song of Bengal, written by Vamik Jaunpuri.
अग्नि कौन बुझाए सूख गए सब तार जिन हाथों में मोती रोले आज वही कंगाल साथी आज वही कंगाल भूखा है बंगाल भूखा है बंगाल कोठरियों में गाजे बैठे बनिए सारा नार कोठरियों में गाजे बैठे बनिए सारा नार सुंदर नारी भूख की मारी बेचे घर घर ला सुंदर नारी भूख की मारी बेचे घर घर ला भूखा है बंगाल भूखा है बंगाल.
After this, I want to show you, when the Debaga struggle took place, then again artists went to the struggle areas and they made some woodcuts which could be then printed into many prints. And one of the artists was Somnath Hod, who went to the caves and villages and remote areas and saw the Tebhaga struggle and made those woodcuts. So I want to show you them. This is, Tebhaga, they are saying 2 parts for us and 1 for the landlord. This is the meeting that villagers are having along with their leaders as to what to do. And earlier I showed you people, hungry people migrating. Now these are militant people going together to fight for their grain, for their right to get 2/3 of the grain which they produce. So this is the procession of militant peasants struggling for their Tebhaga share. So, having said this, now I want to say that, of course, this whole campaign for decolonizing the culture and education and various facets of the erstwhile colonies is a most relevant thing to do, because although political freedom is there, but the colonies, the erstwhile colonies, have not really got rid of the imposition of various ideas and things, and they have not got rid of imperialist design in terms of the colonizers or the Western Empire, if you like to say, still trying to eye the resources of third world countries. And what I talked about Bengal famine and why East India Company came to Bengal, because Bengal was a very rich province. So I want to insist that even today, the tropical countries are, from the point of view of nature, from the point of view of agricultural resource base, they are very rich. The kind of biodiversity that they have, the kind of crops that they produce cannot, it has no match in the temperate region of the existing empire today. So the countries which are belonging to the temperate regions, I'm not talking about people, but the ruling class over there still has this idea that the richness of tropical countries should be available to them, and they continue to exploit the third world countries, especially like in terms of agriculture. I would say that they would like the third world, the WTO agreement on agriculture wants that the third world countries should produce all kinds of fancy food and flowers and the fruits, and export them. Now export and transport has become very easier also. Export them to the West and get in turn food grains which is in surplus production in Western countries. And the design to have to capture the agrarian cropping pattern in tropical region has actually been manifested in African countries, where they are growing cocoa and coffee and all that is required by the Western cold countries. And there are famines again, because when they want food, they're not producing food. And same thing, same designs are there even today in India. And Lenin had said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and one can say that neocolonialism is the highest stage of imperialism which exists today. And part of it we see in India, and just now in India, because I think those of you who are looking at the news know that for last 50 days, the farmers of all over the country, although the government is saying only Punjab farmers, the farmers are sitting encircling Delhi from all sides and saying that the agricultural laws that the government passed during lockdown session is not acceptable to us, and those laws should be repealed. And what were those laws? Those laws were that India has a very elaborate system of food procurement, giving proper price to the farmers, and PDS, like that food which is procured is distributed with government subsidy all over the country to marginalized section. Very elaborate structure. The laws would enable corporates and agribusiness, not just from India, from outside also, to completely capture the trade of agricultural produce. Government role will be reduced to the minimum, and ultimately the food procurement, the minimum support price to the farmers, and the public distribution scheme will be demolished, so that India's agrarian resources go completely in the hand of corporate who are interested in their profits, like the East India Company. And one can be subjected to famines again. And I'm very, very glad that the farmers are protesting and they don't give up, so many of them. And again, once again, I want to say that women have played a very important role in this struggle. In the Delhi cold of not minus, but 1 degree and 4 degree, they are in the open and they are sitting there for 50 days and they're saying that we will not accept these laws and we will not allow Indian agriculture to go completely in the hands of corporate without any government intervention. So the struggle continues and we hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaya, for this wonderful lecture. I was also so struck by the images which illustrate your story and your line and the artwork that goes with it, and the way you connect the past with the present struggle. Thank you very much. I'll open the floor for the chat for people who want to ask questions or make contributions, both either through the webpage of the Decolonial International Network or through the chat in the Zoom. I saw at the Decolonial webpage that there are already contributions. Someone saying that the film Calcutta 71 by Mrinal Sen says a lot.
Yes. There was a film made. Yeah, sorry.
Go on.
Go ahead, sir. No, I'm saying there was a film made on Bengal famine by Mrinal Sen also and Satyajit Ray also. There were 2 films made, but I showed the film made by Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, which was made by Indian People's Theatre Association, and it was in Hindi. Those films are in Bengali. Yeah.
Okay, I'll check here. Let me put some question of my own on the famine question. So when I read the book by Mike Davis on the Victorian Holocaust, he explained that the way the climate changed it on a periodical basis, that then that climate change created the problems in agriculture, but that the rulers before the British colonizers in India were aware of those cycles and then prepared for it by setting up stores and way to help the population, so that pre-colonial seasonal impact on agriculture didn't lead to those famines. Can you comment on that?
I think I already said, when I was talking about 1770 famine, I was saying that before the East India Company got the sovereign right to tax the people, the divans appointed by the Mughal emperors were taxing them in a very lenient manner. And whenever a climate catastrophe came, they would make arrangement not only to waive the tax for that particular year, they would also make arrangement to give relief to the people. In the Battle of Plassey, Sirajudullah was the Diwan of Bengal, and he was a very kind person. And also because Bengal was a rich region, people individually also had a buffer. Some kind of a buffer they had. So if there are climatic variations and calamities, they individually also collectively at the village level and also at the level of rulers were getting support to get over these natural calamities, which the colonizer never bothered for. Because all that they were bothered was that their tax revenue should not reduce. I had said that.
Right. Okay. And then somebody asked on the webpage what the role of political parties and trade union parties were. You mentioned the role of the Communist Party in the Bengal 1943 famine. In other famines, what were the roles of the nationalist movement and other liberation movements in combating the famines?
I don't know, because the Congress party was formed in 1884, and the Great Famine that he's talking about is 1896, 97, 99, 900. So before that, Indian freedom struggle had not taken a very concrete shape. The period which I have covered, and in 1878. The British government made some famine codes. In famine codes, they made some gesture that if there is a natural calamity, the government should provide some relief measures, but at the minimum cost. It was also included that people should be given relief, but at minimum cost. So this was there in 1878. Famine codes came into existence, but Indian freedom struggle really took shape in after 1920. 21. So at the time of Bengal famine, yes, Quit India movement was already there, and there was this big question as to whether India should participate in a war, because Gandhi also said it's a war against a fascist regime, but our exploiters, unless India gets a promise that we will be free after the war, we will willingly participate in the war as a free country, but we cannot be forced by the imperialist rulers to join the war. So Quit India movement was the kind of non-participation in the World War by the Indian political leadership. And so far as trade unions, so far as Bengal famine and war efforts in Bengal are concerned, as I said, the dominant part of Bengal population was rural population, completely disorganized in rural areas. So trade union movements were not there, and trade union movements had just begun from 1920. All India Trade Union Congress was formed in 1921. And trade union movements were there in jute factories and in textile factories of Bombay, asking for India's freedom, but to provide support to the people who were very badly afflicted by the inflationary, deliberate inflation created by the British government. There was no organized effort. And the effort that I talked about, the artist trying to tell the world what is happening, and about the Communist Party trying to organize relief work for the people, was not really well directed to oppose British policy, and probably not in a position to oppose British policy of printing money. And incidentally, India did not have press to print so many notes that Britain required for the war efforts. And then it was printed in England, and I have heard that some of the printing presses in England which printed the notes were German printing press.
Okay, great. Jaya, we are at the end of this session. It's already, the time flies. 1 hour has passed. Thank you very much for your contributions and your...
I hope whatever I said was of some meaning, and I'm really honored to get this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. We will set up the recording. It will be available on the YouTube channel of the Decolonial International Network, and from there we'll share it so that people can learn about it. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone.
Just before you end, since you were talking about opposition, there was this Chittagong where the young people fought against the British ruler and had their own independent, India's small independent period of a few days, led by Surya Sen, which I should mention, which occurred during the same time that Bengal Famine occurred.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.